Hi, I'm Sandy from Invisible Connections, and I have a guest star today, so she's going to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Michelle Levine. I'm Sandy's mother.
So today I've gathered some questions from Quora, and we're going to just answer them, and it's going to be about just parents and what it's like to parent an autistic child from the perspective of a parent. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The first question that I picked was, as a parent of a child with autism, what gives you hope? So, Mom, if you would like to start answering this question.
Sure thing. I think the fact that there is more research in the area of autism now than 20 years ago, and more services are offered now for people affected by autism than before, gives me hope that people diagnosed today will have more opportunities than you did as a toddler. I believe in some areas autism is more accepted by the neurotypical community in general than in years past, and hopefully within the next decade, awareness and education will lead to those on the spectrum having less difficulty finding employment and feeling more accepted in the community at large and at school.
I would say that even the research agrees with you, because there's one TED Talk that I watched where he talks about how in the past, couple of years or so, how their diagnosis of those with autism has went on an uprise. As we're learning more, we're finding more signs, and we're better able to diagnose. So that is definitely something that I think was a good point that you made.
And there's probably more tools available for children on the spectrum and for their parents as well now than there were 20 years ago.
Very true, very true. So the next question is, what is it like to parent a child with autism?
That's a great question, Sandy. You were diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified when you were 2. Prior to that, we didn't know you were on the spectrum. I had my suspicions basically due to your reactivity to things, and that was very different than what I was used to. I was very alone in my thinking, though. People around me did not see what I was seeing, and at first, you're concerned as a parent and you're worried. Once you were diagnosed, the concern and worry grew primarily because I was worried about how much you might struggle in school, both from an educational standpoint and from a social standpoint. I think all too well from my own experiences in school, how intolerant to difference people can be and how lonely it can be in a room full of people if you don't have a friends group. I struggled with that myself, and I was not on the spectrum. I think as a parent of a child with autism, you first have to educate yourself as best as you can with the information that's out there, and then you fight like a mama bear to get your child the resources he or she needs to be as successful as possible, which is exactly what I did. I started with the pediatrician who referred us to a developmental pediatrician who referred us to having you tested. You were 9 months behind in your development at 18 months. And needed tubes in your ears. You were having difficulty speaking because you could not hear. You had fluid in your ears. And once we took care of that and began speech therapy, you began talking. Once that hurdle was over, we had to focus on working with you to communicate when something didn't feel right to you. So rather than having meltdowns, we wanted you to use your words. This took a lot of time, but we did get there. So going back to your question, it takes patience. Being a parent of someone on the spectrum, as well as a creativity and a willingness to be open to doing things a little differently and finding ways to help your child accomplish things throughout the day. You know the saying, take it one day at a time? This rings true for raising a child on the spectrum. Like neurotypicals, people on the spectrum have good days and bad days, and the best thing to do is take each day as it comes and work through each day, celebrating the successes and learning from the failures. The failures are opportunities to be creative and finding solutions and having the patience with yourself and others to start each day with a clean slate and a reasonable expectation. Because of your day-to-day challenges, I think your triumphs were so much sweeter to celebrate because of the challenges your neurotypical brother encountered. Not that his triumphs were not celebrated, they were. It just wasn't the same. I think being educated on the subject of autism, being patient, and being an advocate for your needs were really at the forefront of being a parent for someone on the spectrum. But to be honest, all these things you do as a parent for a neurotypical child as well.
Yeah, that's very true. One of the things I liked that you said is that we're trying to educate a lot more. And I think we're doing that with this podcast, wouldn't you say?
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think, honestly, things like that, and even, I would say, encouraging, let's say your child grows up wanting to educate and wanting to take that. I almost wanted to do that because of my experience with autism and with other people who maybe weren't as educated about autism. I wanted to fill in the gaps a little bit. So I think these experiences almost made me want to do those things more. And I think as a parent, would you say that's something that should be encouraged? I feel like that's something you did for me. You encouraged me to follow my dreams, even if they were a little bit risky.
Yes, absolutely. I can tell you, as a child, when you were going to, it was a special needs preschool, you were a very helpful child. You would help everybody in the classroom if they needed help. You had one child in particular that you'd play with all the time, and it sounded like you were his main little buddy. And it was interesting because when you would come home from school, you would talk about this boy, I think his name was Peter, and you would talk about different games that you would play, and I would suggest, well, why don't you play this game or that game? And you'd say, well, he can't play that game, or he can't play that game. And I didn't quite understand why until I spoke with the teacher, and she said, well, she's a great friend to Peter, but she's right. Peter can't play some of those games because Peter was blind. And Sandy didn't see that disability when she played with Peter and interacted with Peter. She just wanted to play with him because she had a good time when they would play games and talk, and it didn't matter to her. And I think that she's carried that through her life in interacting with people that have visible or invisible disabilities. She doesn't see the disability, she sees the person. And that, I think, makes me a very proud parent because it means I did my job right.
You're going to make me cry. No, that's one of my favorite stories that you tell. Because honestly, I don't remember much from that time in my life, but I really enjoyed, I just remember that kid being like not able to do the same things as the other kids, and I felt like he almost got left out, and he was kind of on the sidelines doing his own thing, because I think you said that the teachers, when you went in, were saying, like, all these kids are coloring, and your kid's not, like, coloring with the rest of the kids, or wasn't that something that happened, or?
No, I think you had told me that, he can't color, he can't do this, he can't do that. And I was asking the teachers about it, and then they explained to me, well, it's because he's blind.
I think I just saw a kid who wasn't able to join the rest of the kids, and I felt bad. I didn't want him to be isolated.
And he couldn't color, and you said, that's okay, we can do something else.
Exactly.
And I think that I think it speaks to your character and the fact that even as a young child, you saw people for what was inside and not what challenges they had.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, our next question is, why do some parents ignore the signs of autism in their child? So this one I actually did have a little research, so I'm going to talk about the research first, and then you can talk about your perspective on the issue. The research I found, so I was looking on Autism Interacts, ABA, and it seems that they said denial can cause irritation, bewilderment, and a sense of isolation, making it difficult for parents to seek emotional help and children to receive services. Now, obviously, this depends on every individual case, so they are just making a general consensus, as most research does. But yeah, I think it is different depending on the parents, depending on the form of autism, depending on a lot of different factors. So now why don't you talk about what you think about this question?
Okay, so I can only speak from personal experience and what I encountered with family and some friends regarding autism in general when you were diagnosed. I think sometimes parental behavior is largely impacted by the way the parents themselves were raised. What kind of household did they grow up in, and how people with learning differences were viewed and handled in their view. And how did those parents react to individuals on the spectrum, and how were they treated? I think all of this impacts what kind of parents we become. When you have parents that have unrealistic expectations or expectations that are very difficult to meet, like getting an A on every test and project in school, regardless of the subject matter and difficulty, and not being satisfied with the expectation of just doing your best whatever the grade outcome is, sometimes you end up with people who not only have a great deal of personal stress trying to be the best at everything that they do, but they expect the same in everyone around them. And sometimes when kids don't meet those expectations, then the excuse train comes barreling through. My child didn't get an A because the teacher doesn't like him or her, or the coach did not pick my kid for the team because he or she is a moron. Every good parent wants the best for their child in every way, and no one wants to see their child struggle. I think sometimes parents themselves have their own personal psychiatric issues or personality impairments that can lead to them being in denial that their child could ever possibly have a learning difference. These types of parents often view their child as an extension of themselves, and rather than viewing their child as someone with their own independent identity. So if they think they're perfect, then they're going to think that their child is exactly the same. Sometimes they just refuse to see the signals their child is dropping in front of them too. Lastly, there are those parents that simply do not care to acknowledge there's an issue because it may result in them being placed under a microscope, or that their social circle may suddenly become a lot smaller due to lack of acceptance. I think there are lots of reasons for this, and I think through more education, you become something more of an expert at spotting people that are on the spectrum and seeing that those issues within your child. And the faster you gain that knowledge, the faster you reach acceptance of a new and different norm for you and your child, one that may be more fulfilling than you thought it would be previously.
That's a good answer. Yeah, I think I like how you said there's a lot that goes into it as well. We saw a lot of this happening in the schools for the internship that I did and for the time that I was working at the previous school that I worked at. We saw a lot of these situations. I don't even have to specify to tell you, like, I saw this throughout my whole entire time going to different schools. There were parents who felt like they could say, hey, this is something my child's struggling with, and there were other parents who didn't want to admit that their child had a learning difference. But I think with education, people are starting to learn that it's not such a bad thing. I think we have to get past the stigma of this is such a bad thing that's going on. Because with the right support, I think you can even vouch for this, with the right support, that these kids can be successful.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes, denial can actually lead to a delay in getting services for these kids. Because if you're looking at it from this parental standpoint of you're walking in and speaking with a parent or a teacher for parent-teacher conferences, and you say, how's my son or daughter doing? And they say, well, they're struggling with X, Y, and Z. A lot of times parents will say, well, you're not challenging them. You're not challenging them enough. They're bored in your class, and they're not really looking deeper into that situation, saying maybe they need to be tested. Part of that has to do with the fact that if you're living in a school district that has hundreds of or thousands of kids, the resources they have to test children for these types of issues is limited. For you, I can tell you that you had to be retested when you were in school. It took it can take 6 to 9 months, which is a decent chunk of the school year, to get in line to be tested. And that means that once you've been tested and they can pinpoint the issues that you have, it takes that much longer to get the services on board and the IEP written so that you can be successful in school. And that's a lot of time lost. So I'm hoping that, in the next 10 years, parents will have a better understanding of learning challenges, the process, and hopefully the time frame between noticing that there might be a learning issue and getting it evaluated and treated. That time frame shortens.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then there's also the problem of limited spots, which is something that I've always hated. So even if you are able to identify a learning difference, let's say you identify it in the middle of the year, because you have to wait that 9-month period to get tested, there might not even be spots in learning support for your child until the next year. And then you got to wait even longer to get those supports.
And the other part of this that can be concerning, depending on the school district that you're in and the resources that they have, sometimes what will happen is they will see improvement in the child. Let's say we're talking about speech therapy, that there's a vast improvement. They're communicating verbally better, but maybe their nonverbal communication still needs some work. And you have an IEP meeting to evaluate the plan, and the school says to you, well, she's doing a lot better with speech, so we're going to take this service away and we're going to give it to someone else because this person's been waiting to have a spot, and if we take your child off, we can give it to this child. While I understand where they're coming from, it's a disservice to your child if they still need the service. So throughout Sandy's education, we had to advocate for her to keep the services that she needed every single time we went into the school.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me. But yeah, we saw this also throughout, I saw it a lot throughout my experiences teaching as well. Kids who just couldn't get the services they needed. And it was difficult. And the other tough thing is I think it's almost excelled now with the teacher shortage. There's less special ed teachers to fill those spots. So it's definitely a difficult issue that I'm hoping in the future won't be an issue. So moving on to question 4. So I will say this question is a little bit controversial, but that's exactly why I chose it, because I think we need more education on these issues so that they become better. So question 4 was, I just found out one of my employees is on the autism spectrum, so I terminated his position because of that. Him and his parents are threatening to sue the company. Are there lawyers that can defend me? Yeah, I really didn't like this question, to be completely honest, but I did do some black and white research on it. So according to the U.S. Department of Labor, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits any discrimination against any people with disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, public accommodations, communications, and access to state and local government programs. That means you cannot fire someone just because they're autistic. You can't fire someone because they can't be transported. Maybe they have a wheelchair and they need help with that. You can't. You have to accommodate them. So I don't think there's going to be many lawyers that are going to defend that, to be completely honest. So with this question, I actually have a follow-up question that Mom is going to answer. What do you think about an employer posting a question like this one on an autism forum? This was found on an autism forum.
I think that it's disturbing. I think either this individual did not realize that they were posting this on an autism forum, or they realized it and it was meant to be hurtful to those that were on the spectrum. Either way, this individual is very ignorant. It's sad that we live in a world today where we still have individuals who are unwilling to accept the differences in others. And it's not just with, autism. It's with race, it's with gender, it's with any differences in other people. My heart really breaks for the employee who was fired, and I hope and pray that they have found an even better job opportunity with a supporting and accepting team of coworkers. I think there's no excuse for this kind of behavior.
And I think it shows as well the importance of maybe also having employers learn about this issue, but also having employees who can advocate for themselves. I think teaching people on the autism spectrum or people with any difference to be able to advocate for themselves. I think is important. And I'm sure this person probably did that and still got fired. And I feel bad. I hope that this person found a job that, like you said, treats them well. And yeah, I hope for a day when this kind of stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah, me too.
So, last question before our little halfway point. What do you, as a parent of a child with autism, want friends and family to understand?
I think it's important for people to understand that individuals with autism have a great capacity to love and be loved, and that people on the spectrum have a very unique perspective to the way the world works. Often those on the spectrum are very creative, and even through their thought processes that are different, they are not less valuable than those that are neurotypical.
Very good answer. I don't think I can state that any better. like you topped it. I think just education on this issue and having friends and family understand. Well, I think even small nuances like, hey, we have a big party going on. This is a little too much sensory overload for me. I'm going to walk out of the room and come back later. Having them understand that is not me being rude, but hey, this is just a little too much for me right now. Like, I need to take a step away. I think things like that are important. I'll share a little bit of a personal story. We went to a party here, right, that we were invited to, like a birthday party. And there were other people on the spectrum at this party. So it made me almost feel more comfortable, because if I were to like walk away, I wouldn't have to explain myself. Everybody knew, oh, if she's walking away, she's just going through sensory overload. Like, she just needs a break and she'll come back. No big deal. I think that was very helpful to me. For other things that I had to do, like professional developments and things like that, it was frowned upon to get up and walk out. They'd think, oh, that's unprofessional. What are you doing? Like, you should be listening to this. And so I think it's things like that I want friends and family to understand. We're not being rude. We're just advocating for ourselves.
And with regards to what you were just saying about walking away, I think sometimes people need to understand that in order for you to really be present in the moment or at the party, you might need to have that moment or two to yourself to gather yourself, to decompress from everything that's going on around you in order to go back there and be present.
Well, and the other thing that I want to mention about sensory overload, it really takes maybe two people having two different conversations and you just being in the middle. Because for me, at least, and I don't know if this is everybody, but for me, like, let's say you have family on one side of the table, you just happen to be in the middle, and there's, another conversation happening. It almost feels like the two conversations on the opposite ends of the table just kind of like mixed together. Like, I can never tell exactly what one side of the table is talking about and exactly what the other side of the table is talking about, because my brain almost processes it like it takes a couple of words from each and just mixes them together, and it can be very confusing. So even just, you're right about being present, getting up, walking out, and coming back, yes, that will make me more present because I'll actually be able to hear what's happening.
Right.
Okay, so now we are at our GoFundMe discussion. So I always do this near the halfway point of our podcast, and it's really important to talk about this. As you all know, I am the board secretary of Teamwork Wins, and it's just such an important organization. You got to know Adele, right?
Fantastic. She's absolutely the most fantastic advocate for people with invisible challenges that I've ever met.
Yeah, amazing stuff. So we have been working on creating some programs, and it's just, I don't even know how to describe my experience in the past, because I have attended her programs and they are just so amazing. I couldn't even sit here and tell you how much they changed my life, because it just cannot be expressed in one recording. So we are going to play the video that's been going around. It is our video where we talk about the programs we're going to design for the future.
Back. My name's Adele Saccarelli Cavallero. I'm the founder and executive director of this wonderful organization, a foundation for awareness and change. And it's dear to my heart.
I'm Gail Kirshner, and I'm the executive co-director.
I am Sandy Durenzi, and I am the board secretary.
Hey, is Teamwork Win still running? Well, we're on hiatus for a little bit. Or no, during COVID, we had to stop a little bit. Over the years, I have received phone calls from people that have attended our camps, and now they're in college and in the workplace. And I talk to these people that have attended the programs. They're always so excited, and they express such great gratitude about what they learned here. Our staff and our volunteers just were miraculous. I know that sounds a little out there, but they really were. They changed lives.
Our new focus with our programs is with 3 different underserved populations. One is underserved youth who are at high risk for getting into trouble, having difficulty in school, and not being happy and successful. We also want to work with youth who have parents in prison, and we also want to work with ex-offenders who are trying diligently to turn their life around, but need additional support because of their invisible challenges.
I would really like to create a program for raising awareness and educating workplaces about the autism spectrum and hiring employees, as well as trying to spread education to workplaces about autism. I'm hoping to also help one-on-one in order to help them find employment opportunity. One of the other things I want to do is make one of these programs virtual. Still in the works, but I think it would be really cool, because then people from all around the world or different parts of the United States and different time zones would be able to join.
We have a lot to do about awareness and change. Our organization is really about looking at the perceptions as children, sometimes misperceptions, sometimes stories that we told as children, and kind of clearing them up, undoing those beliefs about ourselves that aren't so nice. And I hope you come join us. See you soon.
So yes, please support either by donating to the GoFundMe, or another thing that you can do to support as well, if you're unable to do that, is also to just share the video. The video is on all of my social media, which will be in the description of this podcast, or even just sharing the podcast so that other people can listen to it as well would be helpful. So now we are going to move on to the last couple of questions in our podcast today. So the next one was, is it possible to be too empathetic as an autistic parent or autism parent?
Okay, the short answer, no. The longer answer is that I think that neurodivergent people experience more issues with socialization and general acceptance by others than most neurotypical people. I think that having empathy for anyone who is struggling is important, and I believe it is that empathy that helps empower people with invisible challenges, not just specifically people on the autism spectrum, to know that they have people in their corner and that they are there to offer a listening ear and help when it's needed. It's also important to have that this would give people struggling with security to know that they're not alone.
That's a good answer. This question actually reminds me of a story that I wanted to tell, and I'm sure you remember this. So as a teenager, my dad and I, we went to family therapy because we just needed an extra person to help us communicate, because he was someone who was very sarcastic, which is great to other people, but wasn't helpful to me because I'm not really good at reading certain types of sarcasm. Some I think I'm better than others, but like it's that serious tone of sarcasm that I'm not good at reading. And so we had to go to family therapy, and I remember, the therapist was asking me like, well, what do you want from him? And I think my answer was like, I want some sort of support. And she played this Modern Family clip for me. And it was of Phil Dunphy. He was at the spa, and Claire was calling, and she just wanted his support, and he was giving her advice. And what was it? The ladies were like, that's such a manly thing to say. Or, yeah, it was hilarious. But like, my therapist played that clip for me, and she's like, this is what you want from him, isn't it? And I was like, yeah. So I think your point, saying that we want support is so true. We want support, we want empathy, so we can go solve our problems on our own. And I think there are times where I do want advice. There are times where I ask for advice, but there are times where I just want a listening ear. And yeah, so I could go solve problems on my own. So I think that clip almost like sums it up in a nutshell. And that's what I thought about when I found that question.
Yes, I actually remember talking about this with you before. And I think that offering that empathy and creates a safe space for kids, regardless of whether they're on the spectrum or have an individual learning difference or not. I think it's important for them to feel heard and to feel secure and feel like they have a safe space to communicate their needs.
Very good, yeah. Okay, the next question. What are parents with autistic children tired of hearing? That one's more of a you question because I'm not a parent.
Well, sometimes people who do not have a child on the spectrum are not educated on the subject, basically because that's not something that they live with day to day, and therefore they may put their foot in their mouth. In my experience, I've heard everything from, this must have come from your gene pool, or maybe she will grow out of it, and maybe it's a phase. Some of my favorite responses came from the school system. Things like, we have other kids we need to give these services to, so we need to reduce the services your daughter is receiving because it's a large school district. If she still needs the services once we take them away, we can try to give them back. Or a response like, she isn't college material. I've also heard if your child needs speech, OT, and PT, maybe he or she would be better off at a different school. I heard that from the public school my daughter was attending during an IEP meeting. So for everyone that is in the listening audience, if you have a child with an invisible challenge and your child is going to public school, you need to realize that you're dealing with people that are unfamiliar with what the school is required to provide if they're giving you canned responses like that. I would let them know
that you know
that you do know what your own child's rights are, and that in this public school arena, if they can't provide the services your child requires to be successful in learning that the public school is required to pay the tuition for your child in full to go to another school. I educated the school on this fact and let them know that if they chose to go down that road, that I would find the most expensive school I could for them to pay for. Money talks, and once they heard those words, they realized that I might make good on that, and they immediately provided Sandy with the services that she needed.
You see, I feel like that story speaks to the fact that these schools only care about the money. I mean, they didn't do anything until you told them that they would have to pay. So I those stories, when I hear them from other kids, make me sad. But then I kind of also remember my own experience and realize, yeah, my school kind of sucked.
I think it's money, but I also think it's limited resources. And I also think that it's the sheer number of children that they have that require services. Sadly, I think every year there are more and more kids that are slipping through the cracks that need services that never get them and never get evaluated because they don't have the resources to get those needs met for those children.
Well, and especially now, because all the school systems are in limbo after everything that happened with the pandemic and just losing teachers. People say that sped up the teacher shortage. So a lot, and I can speak personally to that because there were internships where we would sub every day, or you'd be in a classroom that wasn't yours. You'd have to teach a topic that you didn't get certified with. And so now they're making it so you certify in every subject so that you can cover any substitute and they don't have to hire someone else to substitute. But I feel like that's almost creating more of a shortage because you're getting employees that are more well-rounded so that you don't have to hire more people. And it's not really fixing the issue of needing more special ed teachers to provide these services and to create almost like just a way for kids to not slip through the cracks. So I think that's a problem. And the other thing, too, that I want to mention is they said a lot that I wasn't college material. But, I just want to mention to those parents out there that they weren't correct because in 2023, I graduated with my education degree. So don't let those things scare you.
And don't let the school dictate to you what your child can or cannot do. Sandy struggled in college, but she did get through it. And it's not to say that every person on the spectrum is going to go to college. There are some fantastic trade school programs out there that would be a great option for kids on the spectrum as well. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that you have to make sure that your child doesn't fall into the trap of believing what a school is telling them they can and cannot do without them trying.
And to be honest, I think for a lot of situations, parents know their children, hopefully, better than the school. So you're going to know, your child better. You're going to have an idea of what their dream is, and you're going to have an idea of whether they should or shouldn't go to college, depending on what they want to do. I had a friend who went to a trade school, very successful now. Like, either way doesn't matter, because as long as they are happy, that's what matters the most.
That's right.
Happy and successful. Okay. So the next question I have a little bit of research on, so I'll go over that, and then you can share your perspective as well. So what are early signs of autism? So according to the Department of Neuroscience, UC San Diego School of Medicine website. Some early signs in toddlers between 12 and 24 months, that's mainly what it talked about, is 12 and 24 months, include talking or babbling in a voice with an unusual tone, displaying unusual sensory sensitivities, carrying around objects for extended periods of time, displaying unusual body or hand movements, seeming overly fussy or difficult to soothe, showing low enthusiasm to explore new things, or appearing underactive. Now, one of the things I want to mention about this research, and they mentioned it as well, is that even if your child has these signs, it might not indicate autism, so just make sure that you check in with your child's healthcare provider if this is something you're looking into. And again, like, it could mean nothing, it could mean something. It's really, if you notice these things, something you should go to a healthcare provider for, and I will forever vouch that. Okay, so I have a follow-up question to this question. What were some early signs you noticed for me that made you want to pursue evaluation?
There were a few early signs that I felt seemed unusual. As an infant, whenever you needed like a diaper change, you would cry in a way that sounded like you were being tortured or stabbed or something. It was a violent screaming, it like ear piercing. You would thrash your body around and you would get very agitated. And during those times, it would take a very long time to get you to calm down. As a toddler, you ripped your hair out of your head. You would hit and scratch yourself when you became enraged. Often we would not know why you were behaving this way. So it was difficult to determine what you needed at those times. You were speech delayed, so that made it even more difficult to determine what set you off in the first place. One of the biggest things that made me realize that we needed you evaluated was you were in the family room playing with your toys and you actually picked up a sit and spin. I think some people in your audience will know what that is, the older people, that it was a very large toy that kids would sit on, and it had a wheel in the middle that you would turn and you would spin yourself around. It was relatively heavy, and you picked the toy up over your head. It probably weighed just about as much as you did, and you threw it into a wall. I called your dad at work and at that moment and told him something isn't right and that I was getting you evaluated.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting story. So
that was like a neon sign right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think any parent is going to forget that, and it must have been difficult. But also at the same time, like, I think it was a good thing that happened because it pushed you to get me evaluated.
I think we were going to evaluate you regardless because, at the time you weren't talking, and once we realized that you needed to be evaluated, and we found out that you had fluid in your ears, you needed tubes, and that was deterring your ability to talk, because the ENT actually described it as, if you've ever watched Charlie Brown, when you watch any of those cartoons and they're in school and the teacher's talking and they're talking wah 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 wah, that's what the ENT was saying was what you were hearing. So imagine how frustrating that could be to have needs and wants and you can't communicate them, and someone is talking to you and you're hearing something, so you turn your head but you don't understand. You never understand what they're saying. How frustrating that could be.
So frustrating that I threw a sentence pen.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I think obviously like things, if you catch it early, like I have people now tell me things like, well, I would have never known that you were autistic. Well, it's because we caught it early. It's because, I got the services I needed because I had an amazing parent over here who pushed for those things and fought for those things. So obviously, yeah, well, of course. I mean, like, you did. And because of that, I had a lot of help, and with speech therapy, with socialization, I'm still not perfect, but that's why it's, the way it is now. I think if I hadn't had a lot of those services earlier on, then I would have struggled more as an adult. And so I think that even goes back to our other question of making sure that, if you are a parent in denial and you are listening to this, listen, we're not judging you here, but it would help a lot if you get on it, because the faster you get on it, the better, because then, your child is set up before they're 18 with all of these life skills that are so necessary. And my speech therapist was like one of my favorite teachers. It was, Miss Borgman, if you were watching this. But she's one of my favorite teachers. And like, even just small little things, she showed me faces, you look at the picture of the face, you try to determine what emotion. Didn't you say that when I was younger, I couldn't read the emotions on the faces?
Yeah, and I think that that's a common problem with autistic individuals, is not being able to determine from people's facial expressions what emotions they're experiencing. And it can be very difficult, especially if you're interacting with somebody that has a very flat affect on their face, where every emotion, they seem to have the same facial expression. So that makes it very difficult. She was not only a phenomenal speech therapist, I want to add, she was a fantastic advocate for you during IEP meetings. She's a wonderful lady, and I know that she's making a difference in the lives of many kids.
For sure. Yeah, so it's definitely that. And I would say the deadpan sarcasm type of, like, the type of sarcasm that seems serious, that is something that I struggled to read. And it's something that has become very popular, which I kind of wish it wasn't, because I always struggle to read it. Okay, so we are wrapping up a little here with about 8 minutes left. So I think we will talk about this last question for a little bit. So what is some final advice that you have for parents who have autistic children? So you can share your opinion, and then I'll share mine, and then we'll wrap up here.
Sounds good. I'm going to echo what I've stated earlier in our discussion here. Parents, educate yourselves. Be patient, be an advocate, and most of all, love your child with all your might. Make your home a safe space for them to feel loved and secure, and be creative in finding ways to help your children while also giving them opportunities to do things for themselves so that they can have small successes that lead to big ones. Also, teach your children at a young age how to become advocates for themselves as they get older. While they're kids, you need to teach them to love themselves for the people that they are. And that is going to be a magic recipe for success for them in the future.
So I'm not a parent myself, but I can talk from the autism perspective. As the child, I can talk as the child to give some perspective. So one of the things that you did that I really liked when I was growing up, when I struggled with behavior, well, first of all, you had a really good routine for us, which is so, so important. Like, honestly, I think that's even important for kids who are neurotypical. Like, I think every child should have a really good, strong routine. And the other thing you had is I remember when my room was all pink, you had this, like, bulletin board, and it had my chores on it. And it was like this, like, foam type of thing on the bulletin board. And it had, like, Velcro, so you could move the different chores to finished, like, on the other side as you went through them. And that was so helpful as a child. And it taught me, like, responsibility, too. And I was excited about those things. The other thing you did that I remember is when we were on good behavior, you almost had, like, marbles for us, or those blue mineral-looking marbles. And for each time that we were good, we got, like, a certain amount of marbles. And at the end, when we had enough marbles, we could get, like, a prize. And you had, like, all these different, like, toys and stuff like that. Like, you had this whole, like, prize box.
From, like, the dollar store.
Yeah. I'm hopefully going to do that with my kids hopefully the dollar store goes back to the dollar store. Like, but I would love to do that with my kids in the future. But things like that does exactly what you said. It gives us small accomplishments and to work towards big ones.
Having a routine establishes a sense of predictability. So for people that are on the autism spectrum, sometimes a change in routine, a change in the game plan for the day can really throw them for a loop, and it makes life more challenging for them if they don't have that sense of predictability in their daily routine. So what I tried to do was make the routine the same every day. And if there was going to be a change, like maybe at the end of the week we're going to a family party, or somebody had a doctor's appointment, or we had to go somewhere that we don't normally go, I would prepare Sandy for it and let her know, we're going to go to this place on Wednesday. It's Monday. That's in 2 days. And, this is how long we're going to be there. And this is when we're going to be home. And it would give her a sense of security to kind of prepare herself well in advance for those things. Now, life's messy. So sometimes you can't give them that sense of predictability. You can't prepare them for every situation that happens. So sometimes things wouldn't go quite right. And, you help your child cope with those things and work towards being okay with situations and times when things aren't quite exactly as they're expected. And when Sandy was younger, I would tell her often, sometimes life doesn't go the way that you expect, and sometimes your day takes a giant detour in where you expect it to be, and at different times, what you were anticipating your day was going to be like.
Yeah, and I think I still get the feeling sometimes when things go out of routine, but I know how to better cope with it and deal with it, which is the important part. I think the other thing, too, to give perspective, I would almost say that, like, a change in routine, especially to a child, is very much like, you go in to take a test, like a Spanish test, and the teacher in the front says, oh, actually, we're going to test you for French. That's what a change of routine, I would say, in my perspective, feels like to an autistic child. It's a lot of anxiety. And, oh my gosh, am I prepared for this? Like, and especially with sensory overload, like having a good pair of headphones, having the right things to bring with you as well is another thing that's important, and that's what a routine can provide for a child. Now, again, as you said, there's no, the world is not perfect, and there will be things that are unexpected, but I think for those times, like doing, I think you had good advice about that. That will better prepare us to cope with those times and be prepared for them. So that is the podcast. Any final words before we head off?
Yes. I just want to say thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I love you so much, and I'm so proud of all the accomplishments you have made in your life up to this point, and I look forward to seeing what the future holds for you. To your listeners, I say thank you for listening and supporting Sandy's podcast. To offer more support to the neurodiverse community, please consider donating to Teamwork Wins. Please check them out, www.teamworkwins.org, and have a great day.
All right, so that is it for the podcast. As Mom said, please consider donating to GoFundMe. That and the Teamwork Wins website will be in the description of this podcast, as well as my social media. Please follow me to get more updates on all that stuff and our podcast. So thank you for being on my podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye.